until the last light. A story of two hearts, one hospital room, and the kind of love that doesn't need a lifetime to be complete. Chapter 1. The room at the end of the hall. The hospital smelled the way all hospitals did. Like antiseptic trying to cover up something it couldn't quite hide. Arif had been here 3 times before, but this time felt different. This time, the nurse who wheeled him in wouldn't quite meet his eyes. Stage 4. The oncologist had said 2 weeks ago, in a voice so carefully gentle it had felt like an insult. We can manage your pain. We can give you time. But we can't give you a cure. 26 years old, and he was being told to get his affairs in order. His room was on the 4th floor, at the end of a long hallway that looked out over a small courtyard garden. Small mercy, he thought, that at least he'd have something green to look at while his body quietly gave up. He was still arranging his things. A stack of books he probably wouldn't finish, a photo of his parents, a worn blue hoodie, when the door opened without a knock. You must be Arif Malhotra. The voice was low, steady, the kind of voice built for delivering bad news without letting it shatter the room. I'm Dr. Rayansh Oberoi. I'll be handling your care. Arif looked up and found himself, for one strange moment, forgetting that he was dying. The doctor was tall, dressed in a white coat that hung slightly loose on broad shoulders, dark hair pushed back like he'd run his hand through it one too many times that morning. But it wasn't his looks that struck Arif. Plenty of doctors were handsome in that clean, clinical way. It was his eyes. Tired, but not indifferent. Tired the way someone gets when they've cared about too many people who didn't make it, and kept caring anyway. Dr. Oberoi, Arif repeated, testing the name. Should I be scared of you? A small, surprised huff of breath, almost a laugh. Only if you don't take your medication on time. That an order? A very strong suggestion. Rayansh moved to the foot of the bed, picked up the chart, scanned it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd read 100 charts that week. But his eyes lingered on Arif's for one extra second before he looked back down. I've read your file. I know what it says. I'm not going to pretend it says something else. Most doctors do, though. Pretend. I'm not most doctors. Rayansh set the chart down. I'll tell you the truth every time you ask for it. That's the only thing I can promise you now. Arif studied him. This stranger who spoke about dying so plainly, without flinching, without the syrupy sympathy he'd gotten used to bracing against. Okay, he said finally. Then tell me the truth. How long? Something flickered across Rayansh's face. Not pity, something closer to respect. Months, maybe less. It depends on how your body responds to the palliative treatment. I won't lie and tell you it's more than that. Thank you, Arif said quietly, for not lying. Rayansh nodded once, like he understood exactly what that thanks was worth. I'll check on you every morning. If you need anything before then, tell the nurses to page me. Not the resident. Me. He left before Arif could ask why a senior oncologist would personally attend to a terminal patient's every page. But as the door clicked shut, Arif found himself, for the first time since his diagnosis, looking forward to tomorrow morning. That night, sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the low hum of machines and the distant footsteps of the night shift. Around midnight, Arif heard his door open again. Softer this time, no knock. I saw your light was still on, Rayansh said, standing in the doorway in a rumpled version of the same white coat. Clearly not on duty anymore, clearly unable to stay away. Trouble sleeping? New room, new bed, new reality where every headache means my brain is failing before the rest of me. Arif tried to make it sound light and mostly succeeded. Rayansh stepped inside, checked the monitor out of habit, then simply stood there for a moment, as though unsure whether he was allowed to stay. Do you want company? Or do you want to be alone with it? It was, Arif would realize much later, one of the kindest questions anyone had asked him since his diagnosis, because it assumed he had the right to choose either. Company, he said. If you don't mind losing sleep over a patient who isn't even really your responsibility tonight. I do that anyway, Rayansh admitted, settling into the chair. Just usually alone in the on-call room, worrying about people who don't know I'm worrying. He glanced toward the courtyard window, dark now, the outline of the hedges just visible under a security light. You get used to carrying people you can't do anything more for. Some nights it's just about being near enough that they don't feel like the illness is the only thing in the room with them. Is that a professional technique? No, Rayunch said. That one's just mine. They talked for an hour that first night, nothing important, nothing about the diagnosis. Arav told him about growing up in a small town outside Pune, about a father who'd died when he was 12 and a mother who'd raised him alone on a schoolteacher's salary, about the small graphic design business he'd built from nothing before his body had started betraying him with fatigue he'd initially blamed on overwork. Rayunch listened the way few people ever really listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually absorbing every detail, as though committing a person to memory mattered more than any diagnosis on a chart. You should sleep, Rayunch said eventually, rising from the chair with visible reluctance. I have rounds in 6 hours. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me. He paused at the door. 7:15. I'll see you then. It wasn't a professional obligation anymore, and they both silently knew it. Chapter 2, Small Hours. The mornings became a ritual neither of them named out loud. 7:15, Rayunch would knock twice before entering, always twice, Arav noticed, like he was giving Arav a moment to compose himself or perhaps giving himself one. He'd check the monitors, ask about pain levels, adjust medications. But somewhere in the second week, the visits started running long. You're not supposed to sit down, Arav said one morning, watching Rayunch settle into the plastic chair by the window instead of leaving after his checks. I'm not supposed to do a lot of things. Rayunch nodded toward the book on Arav's nightstand. A battered copy of The Alchemist Arav had read a dozen times. Any good? You haven't read it? Medical school doesn't leave much room for anything but medical textbooks and self-pity. Arav laughed. Really laughed, the kind that pulled at his ribs and made him wince, but he didn't stop. Self-pity. A doctor who admits to self-pity. That's rare. I contain multitudes. Rayunch's mouth twitched at the corner. Not quite a smile, but close. What's it about? A boy who travels the world looking for treasure, only to realize the treasure was back home the whole time. Sounds like it'd make a terrible doctor cry. Would it? Rayunch didn't answer that. Instead he asked, family visiting today? My mother comes on weekends. It's a 5-hour drive. I told her not to bankrupt herself on petrol just to watch me sleep. Arav shrugged, an attempt at nonchalance that didn't quite land. Everyone else stopped visiting after the second month. People don't know what to say to someone who's dying, so they say nothing and stay away instead. Something tightened in Rayunch's jaw. That's their failure, not yours. You don't stay away. I'm your doctor. You sat down, Arav pointed out. Doctors don't sit down unless they've got nowhere else more urgent to be, or unless they want to. Rayunch was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the small courtyard garden below, where a gardener was patiently trimming a hedge that would outlive every patient in this wing. Maybe I wanted to, he said finally, so quietly Arav almost missed it. He didn't say anything else. He checked Arav's chart, adjusted the drip, and left with a murmured get some rest. But the words hung in the room long after the door closed, warm and unclaimed, like a gift neither of them was ready to open yet. Arav lay awake a long while after, replaying the way Rayunch's voice had softened on that one sentence, turning the moment over in his mind the way he used to turn over a difficult design problem, looking for the shape of something he wasn't ready to name yet, but which felt unmistakably like the beginning of something he hadn't expected to find here, in a room built for endings. Over the following days, the mornings stretched longer still. Rayunch started bringing 2 coffees instead of 1, though Arav wasn't supposed to have caffeine and they both knew it, and Rayunch always confiscated the cup after exactly 3 sips with mock severity that made Arav laugh anyway. You're going to get in trouble, Arav said one such morning, sipping his forbidden coffee slowly, savoring it, spending all this time with one patient. Don't you have a department head watching your numbers or something? Dr. Kapoor mentioned it, actually. Rayunch didn't look particularly worried. Asked why my morning rounds have started taking twice as long as everyone else's. What did you tell her? That room 412 has complicated needs requiring extended monitoring. Arav raised an eyebrow. Complicated needs. Extremely complicated, Rayunsh said, deadpan, though his eyes were smiling. The patient insists on discussing literature and terrible chess strategy during what should be routine vital checks. It's a whole ordeal. I'm going to tell her you're a liar. Please don't. I worked very hard on that excuse. There was an ease growing between them that Ariv hadn't expected to find here, in a room where he'd assumed only fear and waiting would live. He found himself some mornings, forgetting entirely that he was sick, laughing at something Rayunsh said, arguing playfully about a book, debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza with the kind of passionate commitment usually reserved for people who had decades left to argue about such things. It was on one such morning 3 weeks in, that the nurse, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Sunita who'd been on this ward for over a decade, pulled Rayunsh aside in the hallway just outside Ariv's door. Not quite quiet enough that Ariv, listening through the gap, couldn't hear. "Doctor," she said carefully, "I don't say this to interfere, but everyone on this floor has noticed how you are with him. I only ask that you be careful. With him and with yourself. I know what I'm doing, Sunita. Do you?" Her voice was gentle, not accusatory. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're falling in love with a man who has months left. And I don't know if that's brave or if it's going to break you into pieces neither of you can put back together." There was a long silence. Ariv held his breath. "Maybe both," Rayunsh finally said quietly. "Maybe it can be both. And it's still worth it." Ariv closed his eyes when he heard those words, feeling something in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with tumors or scans. Bloom opened despite everything. That evening, when Rayunsh came for his usual visit, Ariv didn't mention what he'd overheard. Instead, he simply patted the edge of the bed, an invitation, and Rayunsh sat, closer than the chair, closer than either of them had quite dared before. "Sunita thinks you're falling for a lost cause," Ariv said eventually, testing the words carefully, watching for the truth in Rayunsh's face rather than his voice. Rayunsh didn't flinch. "Sunita thinks a lot of things. She's usually right. Not about the lost cause part, though. No, you're not a cause, Ariv. You're not a case study or a difficult patient or a professional risk I'm taking. You're just you. The most alive person I've met in years, even sitting in that bed." He reached over, tucking a strand of hair back from Ariv's forehead. A gesture so gentle it made something in Ariv's chest ache in an entirely different way than the illness ever had. "I don't know how to explain it any better than that." "You don't have to," Ariv said softly. "I think I understand exactly what you mean." Chapter 3: What the Body Knows. By the third week, Ariv had learned Rayunsh's coffee order. Black, too strong, a habit from residency. The fact that he hadn't taken a real vacation in 4 years, and that he'd chosen oncology specifically because his younger sister had survived leukemia at 12, and he'd spent his life since trying to be the doctor who'd saved her, for someone else. "You give everyone that much of yourself?" Ariv asked one evening, when Rayunsh had stayed nearly an hour past his shift, the two of them playing a slow, halting game of chess on a board Ariv had asked a nurse to bring from the rec room. "No." Rayunsh moved a knight, barely looking at the board. "Just you." The admission sat between them like something fragile. Ariv's fingers hovered over his own knight, forgetting the move entirely. "Why?" he asked. Rayunsh looked up, and for the first time since they'd met, Ariv saw something unguarded in his face. Not the composed calm of a doctor delivering diagnoses, but something rawer, more frightened. "Because I look forward to 7:15 in the morning more than I've looked forward to anything in years. And I know exactly how unprofessional that is. And I know exactly how this ends, and I can't seem to stop myself anyway." The room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to the moment unfolding. "I have maybe 4 months, Ariv said slowly. "Maybe less. You're a good doctor. You know better than anyone what that means. Falling for someone in my position. It's not fair to you. Do you think I haven't told myself that every single night since the second week?" Rayunsh's voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "I've sat in my car in the parking garage and told myself to request a transfer to another patient. I've told myself 100 reasons this is a bad idea. None of them have made me want you any less. Ariv's chest ached with something that wasn't the cancer. For once. I'm dying, Rayunch. I know. Rayunch reached across the chessboard, careful not to disturb the pieces, and took Ariv's hand. Thinner now than it had been 3 weeks ago, the veins more visible beneath the skin. I know better than anyone in this building what that means, and I still want whatever time you have left. All of it, if you'll let me. I'd rather have months with you than years of pretending I don't feel this. Ariv looked down at their joined hands, at the 4 taped into the back of his own, at the stark contrast between his doctor's steady, healthy fingers and his own increasingly fragile ones. He thought about all the things he was supposed to feel afraid of now, pain, fear, the unknown darkness waiting at the end of this. He hadn't expected to feel this instead. Something warm, unstoppable, alive. Okay, he whispered. Okay, let's not waste what's left pretending. Rayunch brought Ariv's hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to his knuckles like a vow. Then I'm yours. However long we have, I'm yours. They sat like that for a long while, the chessboard forgotten between them, the hospital going on with its ordinary business outside the door, trolleys wheeling past, a distant intercom paging a doctor to another ward, the whole indifferent machinery of a building built to fight death continuing on, unaware that in one small room, 2 men had just decided to stop fighting the inevitable and simply live inside whatever time remained. I have to tell you something, Ariv said eventually, breaking the quiet, and I need you to really hear it, not just comfort me past it. I'm listening. I'm afraid, Ariv admitted, the words costing him something visible. Not of dying exactly. I've had months to get used to that idea. I'm afraid of becoming someone you have to grieve. I'm afraid of what loving me is going to cost you later, when I'm not here to see whether you're okay. Rayunch was quiet for a moment, considering the words with the same care he gave every difficult diagnosis. Can I tell you something my sister said to me when she was 12 years old, halfway through her 2nd round of chemo? Please, she said. Everyone keeps looking at me like I'm already gone. I'm still here. Please look at me like I'm still here. His voice was thick. I was 17. I didn't understand it then, not really. I understand it now. You're not a ghost yet, Ariv. You're not a grief I'm preloading. You're a person sitting across from me, beating me at chess, drinking coffee you're not supposed to have. I don't want to spend the time you have left treating you like you're already a memory. I want to spend it loving you like you're alive. Because you are. Right now, you very much are. Ariv felt tears gathering, unbidden. Your sister sounds like she was a remarkable kid. She still is. 31 now, 2 kids of her own. Drives me insane every Diwali insisting I bring a girlfriend home. A small, wry smile. I suppose I'll have some explaining to do. Tell her the truth, Ariv said softly. Tell her you found someone extraordinary, and that time didn't matter as much as she thinks it should. Later that week, in a rare quiet hour between medications and visits, Ariv asked Rayunch to bring him a notebook. Plain, unlined, the kind Ariv had once used for design sketches before his hands had grown too unsteady for detailed work. He didn't say what it was for, and Rayunch didn't ask, understanding instinctively that some things needed to unfold in their own time. Over the following weeks, whenever Ariv had the energy, he wrote in it. Sometimes only a few lines, sometimes whole pages, his handwriting growing shakier as the months wore on, but never once stopping. He never let Rayunch read it, not then. Is it for your mother? Rayunch asked once, curious despite himself. It's for you, Ariv said simply. But not yet. Chapter 4 Borrowed Time. Word got around the hospital quietly the way these things do. A nurse noticing Dr. Oberoi lingering long past his shifts, another noticing the soft way he looked at the patient in room 412. No one said anything aloud. Perhaps they understood, in the particular way that people who work around death every day come to understand, that some things shouldn't be interrupted, only witnessed gently from a distance. Rayunch began bringing small things. A thermos of tea from the cafe down the street that Ariv had mentioned once in passing, a paperback of poems, a portable speaker so they could listen to old Hindi film songs Ariv's mother used to hum while cooking. He learned to read Ariv's pain by the set of his jaw before Ariv ever said a word about it. Learned to adjust his medications before Ariv had to ask. Learned the particular quiet that meant Ariv wanted company without conversation, and the different quiet that meant he simply needed to rest undisturbed. "You're spoiling me?" Ariv said one evening, as Ryungsh combed gentle fingers through his hair. Now thinning from the chemo he'd started for pain management, if nothing else. "I have 4 months, give or take, to spoil you in," Ryungsh said. "I intend to use every day of it. Doesn't it hurt? Knowing?" Ryungsh's hand stilled for a moment. "Every second," he admitted. "But I'd rather hurt loving you than feel nothing at all, waiting for something safer that never comes." Ariv's mother, when she visited that weekend, found the two of them curled together on the narrow hospital bed, Ariv's head resting against Ryungsh's chest, an old film playing quietly on a tablet propped against the bedside table. She'd stood in the doorway for a long moment before either of them noticed her. "Ma!" Ariv said, sitting up too fast, wincing, but his mother only smiled, a small, sad, knowing smile. "Don't get up on my account, Beta." She looked at Ryungsh with something like gratitude in her tired eyes. "You're the doctor who calls me every evening, to tell me how he's doing." Ryungsh nodded, suddenly looking younger, almost sheepish. "Yes, ma'am. I thought it was just professional courtesy." She sat carefully at the edge of the bed, took her son's hand. "I understand now that it wasn't. Ma, I'm glad," she said simply, cutting off whatever explanation or apology Ariv had been about to offer. "I'm glad you're not alone in this. I'm glad someone loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Even now, especially now." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady, the way mothers learn to keep their voices steady for their children's sake. "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." She stayed until visiting hours ended, the three of them sharing a simple dinner she'd brought from home, and before she left, she pulled Ryungsh aside in the hallway, much the way Sunita once had. "I buried my husband when Ariv was 12, she said quietly. "I know what it costs to love someone you're going to lose. I also know it costs far more to never have loved them at all. Whatever time you have left with my son, don't spend it bracing for the ending. Spend it the way he needs you to, fully, without flinching. Grieve later. There will be time enough for that." Ryungsh nodded, throat too tight for words, and she squeezed his arm once before disappearing down the corridor toward the elevators, leaving him standing there with her blessing settling over him like something solid enough to hold onto in the months still ahead. That night, after she'd gone, Ariv cried for the first time since his diagnosis. Not from fear, but from something fuller, messier, harder to name. Ryungsh held him through it, saying nothing, simply present, simply there, the way he'd promised to be. Word eventually reached Dr. Kapoor, the department head, in the way things always eventually do. She called Ryungsh into her office on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and Ariv spent the hour waiting anxiously, certain his doctor, his person now in every way that mattered, would be reassigned or worse, disciplined for something that had never once compromised the quality of care he gave. Ryungsh returned an hour later, looking drained but oddly unshaken. "What did she say?" Ariv asked immediately. "She asked if it was affecting my judgment." Ryungsh sat down heavily in the chair that had, by now, become unofficially his. "I told her that if anything, it had made me a better doctor to you than I'd have otherwise been. More attentive, more careful, more willing to fight for every possible good day. I told her I understood the ethics of it were complicated, and that I'd accept a transfer if she truly believed it compromised your care. And..." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said her husband died of pancreatic cancer 11 years ago, in this very hospital, in a bed not unlike yours. She said the nurse who cared for him in his final weeks became her closest friend in the years after, and that she'd stopped believing love follows tidy rules a long time ago. He exhaled, something like relief loosening his shoulders. "She's not reassigning me. She only asked that I document everything transparently, and that I take care of myself too, not just you." Ariv reached for his hand. "I'm glad. So am I." Ryungsh brought Ariv's fingers to his lips. "I don't think I could do this, any of it, from a distance. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm neither of them had expected to build inside a hospital room. Some evenings, Rayunsh brought food from outside, not hospital trays but real food, biryani from a place near his apartment, Kathy rolls from a stall Arav used to frequent before he got sick, small tastes of a world Arav could no longer easily move through on his own. They watched old films on Rayunsh's tablet, propped between them, Arav's head resting against his shoulder. They argued gently about music. Rayunsh insisted on old Kishore Kumar records. Arav teased him mercilessly for being, as he put it, a 34-year-old man with the music taste of someone's grandfather. I contain multitudes, Rayunsh reminded him, and by now it had become something of a private joke between them, a small shorthand for everything he refused to apologize for. There were harder nights too, nights when the pain broke through, when Arav's breathing turned shallow and frightened, when Rayunsh sat awake monitoring every vital sign himself, refusing to leave the room even when his own exhaustion showed plainly on his face. On those nights, there was no laughter, only Rayunsh's steady voice reciting whatever came to mind. Old poems, half-remembered song lyrics, quiet reassurances, until the worst of the pain passed and Arav could finally rest. You don't have to do this every time, Arav murmured once, guilt threading through the words. You need sleep too. I sleep better here than I do at home, Rayunsh admitted. At home, I just lie awake thinking about you anyway. At least here, I can actually do something useful with the worry. Chapter 5, The Weight of Days. The cancer did not pause for love. By the 5th month, longer than the doctors had predicted, a fact Rayunsh clung to with a kind of desperate gratitude, Arav's body had grown thinner, weaker, the pain harder to manage even with the strongest medications available. There were good days still. Days when Arav could sit up on his own, when they could take slow, careful walks through the courtyard garden, when Arav would tease Rayunsh about his terrible taste in ties, when they talked for hours about nothing important at all. Favorite childhood memories, worst haircuts, the trip to the mountains they both knew, without saying it aloud, they would never take together. And there were bad days. Days when the pain broke through even the morphine, when Arav's breath came shallow and frightened, when Rayunsh sat by the bed all night monitoring vitals himself rather than trust the task to anyone else. His own exhaustion etched deep into his face. You need to sleep, Arav murmured on one such night, watching Rayunsh through half-closed eyes. You have other patients. They can wait. Rayunsh didn't look up from adjusting the drip. You can't. Rayunsh. Arav's voice was frail but firm. I need you to promise me something. Rayunsh finally met his eyes, something like dread already gathering in his expression. Anything. When I'm gone, and we both know that's coming, don't look away, look at me. I need you to keep living. Really living. Not just going through the motions of it. Arav's hand found his, thin fingers gripping with whatever strength remained. Don't let this become the reason you stop letting yourself feel things. I've watched you give everything to people who are dying. Promise me you'll let yourself have something, someday, that isn't wrapped up in loss. Arav, promise me. His voice cracked on the words, but his eyes held steady, fierce even in their weakness. I need to know you'll be okay. That's the only piece I need. Rayunsh pressed his forehead to Arav's hand, his shoulders shaking with a grief he'd been holding back for months. Professional composure finally cracking open. I promise, he whispered, though the words tasted like ash, like a lie he desperately wanted to be true. I promise, but I need you to know, there won't be anyone else who makes me feel the way you do. I don't say that to make you feel guilty. I say it because it's true, and I want you to know how much you've meant before. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Arav already knew. Then let it be enough, Arav said softly. What we had. Let it be enough to have loved this fully, even if it was short. Some people live 80 years and never feel what we felt in 5 months. The next morning, against Rayunsh's gentle protests, Arav insisted on being wheeled out to the courtyard garden one more time. It had turned into early winter by then, the air sharp and clean, the hedges the gardener tended trimmed neat as ever, indifferent to the passage of any one life inside the building beside them. I want to remember this place properly, Arav said, tilting his face up toward the pale sun. Not just through a window. Rayunsh wheeled the chair slowly along the gravel path, careful over every uneven stone, and settled beside him on a bench once they'd reached the small fountain at the garden's center, dry now for the season, but still lovely in its stillness. "Tell me something," Arav said. "Something you've never told anyone." Rayunsh considered this for a long moment. "When my sister was sick, I used to pray, not really believing in anything, just desperate, that if she lived, I'd spend my whole life trying to save people the way the doctors saved her. I became a doctor for that promise. But somewhere along the way, I think I started using the job to avoid ever actually being close to anyone. It was easier to care about patients from behind the professional distance. Easier than risking losing someone the way I almost lost her." He looked over at Arav, eyes glassy. "You broke through that distance without even trying. I didn't know how badly I needed someone to, until you did." "I'm glad I did," Arav whispered, "even though I know what it's costing you." "Don't," Rayunsh said gently. "Don't apologize for this. Not once, not ever. This is the best thing that's happened to me in years, and I won't let either of us pretend otherwise just because it hurts." They stayed in the garden until the cold became too much for Arav's weakened body to bear, and even then, neither of them wanted to be the first to suggest going back inside. That evening, Arav's mother arrived for an unplanned visit, sensing somehow, the way mothers often do, that time was growing shorter than anyone had said aloud. The three of them sat together long into the night, sharing food Rayunsh had brought, talking about small, ordinary things. Arav's childhood mischief, his mother's terrible driving, Rayunsh's disastrous attempts at cooking that had once nearly burned down his apartment kitchen. "I want you both to know something," Arav's mother said quietly, as the evening wound down. "I was afraid, when I first learned about the two of you, that I would spend whatever time my son had left worrying about one more complicated thing. Instead, I've watched my son fall in love the way I always hoped he would, even here, even now. I don't have the words for how grateful I am for that." Rayunsh took her hand alongside her son's. "Thank you for trusting me with him." "He trusted you first," she said. "I only followed his lead." In the weeks that followed, Arav's condition began its final, unmistakable decline, the good days growing fewer and further between the bad ones. There were mornings he couldn't manage more than a few whispered words before exhaustion pulled him back under, and afternoons when the pain, even heavily medicated, left him gasping and gripping Rayunsh's hand so tightly his knuckles whitened. Through it all, Rayunsh never once let his composure crack in front of Arav, saving his own grief for the empty on-call room down the hall, where he'd sit alone for 10-15 minutes at a stretch, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes, before returning to Arav's bedside with a steady voice and gentle hands, exactly as he'd promised he would be. "You don't have to be strong for me every second," Arav murmured once, catching the faint redness around Rayunsh's eyes that no amount of composure could fully hide. "I know this is breaking you too. Being strong for you isn't a burden," Rayunsh said, settling into the chair beside the bed, taking Arav's hand gently in both of his own. "It's the last thing I get to give you. Let me give it." Arav's eyes glistened, but he nodded, understanding, and said nothing more, simply holding on. The way they'd learned to hold on to each other through 5 months of borrowed time that had somehow, impossibly, felt like more life than either of them had known how to expect. Chapter 6. The last morning. The end, when it came gently. The kind of mercy Rayunsh had prayed for every night without admitting it to anyone, not even himself. The final decline began quietly, almost unremarkably, the way Rayunsh had seen it begin in dozens of patients before, though nothing had prepared him for how different it felt to watch it happen to someone he loved rather than someone he was simply treating. Arav slept more. He ate less. The bright, teasing energy that had defined so many of their mornings together grew fainter, replaced by a stillness that frightened Rayunsh more than any of the sharp, painful crises of the months before. "I don't want you to remember me like this," Arav murmured one afternoon, catching Rayunsh watching him with barely concealed anguish. "All wires and thinness. I'm going to remember every version of you," Rayunsh said firmly. "The one who beat me at chess 11 times running. The one who argued with me about pineapple on pizza for 45 minutes. The one who cried at his mother's visits and pretended he wasn't. This version too. All of it is you. I don't get to pick and choose which parts one keep. Ariv's mother arrived 3 days before the end, some instinct drawing her back to the hospital ahead of any call from the staff. She took up a quiet vigil in the corner armchair, praying softly under her breath, occasionally humming old lullabies Ariv had known since childhood, her hand rarely leaving her son's. Rayansh, for his part, requested leave from every other patient assignment, a request Dr. Kapoor granted without a single question. He barely left the room those final days, sleeping in fits in the chair that had become, over 6 months, unofficially his own. It was early morning, 7:15, the same hour Rayansh had walked into that room for the first time nearly 6 months before. Ariv had been fading for 3 days, drifting in and out, his mother keeping vigil at his bedside alongside Rayansh. The two of them united now in a grief that had started forming long before this final morning. The night before, sensing something shifting in Ariv's breathing that his training told him to fear, Rayansh had called Ariv's mother and asked her to come immediately, and had not slept at all, sitting instead in the chair beside the bed, holding Ariv's hand through the long, dark hours, murmuring softly whenever Ariv stirred. Old lines of poetry, fragments of songs, small reassurances that asked for nothing in return. "Do you remember?" Rayansh had whispered at one point, close to 3 in the morning. "The first night I came back after my shift, just to sit with you? You asked if I wanted company or wanted to be alone with it. I think that was the night I started falling for you, though I didn't understand it yet." Ariv, barely conscious, had managed the ghost of a smile. "I remember," he'd breathed. "I remember everything." Now, as the pale light of morning crept through the courtyard-facing window, Ariv's eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in days. A lucidity that Rayansh recognized with a doctor's grim understanding and a lover's shattering heart, the kind of clarity that sometimes comes just before the end. "Rayansh." His voice was barely a whisper, but Rayansh was already there, already holding his hand. "I'm here. I'm right here. Thank you," Ariv breathed. "For the 20 knocks. For sitting down when you weren't supposed to. For being the truth when everyone else gave me lies dressed up gently." "Ariv." "I'm not scared," Ariv said, and something in his face, exhausted as it was, held a kind of peace Rayansh would carry with him for the rest of his life. "I got to love you, however short it was. However it ends now. I got to love you and be loved back the same way. That's more than most people get in a lifetime, twice as long as mine." "I love you," Rayansh said, the words breaking apart even as he spoke them, tears finally falling freely down a face that had learned, over years of this work, to hold itself together in front of the dying. "I love you. I will always love you." Ariv's mother held his other hand, murmuring a prayer under her breath, tears streaming silently down her face. "Take care of him, Ma," Ariv whispered, his eyes fluttering. "And Rayansh, the promise. Remember the promise." "I remember," Rayansh choked out. "I promise. I promise." Ariv's eyes closed, his breathing slowing, gentling, like a tide finally reaching stillness after a long, long journey to shore. The monitor's rhythm slowed, then stopped, and the room fell into a silence that held, impossibly, both the deepest grief and something like grace. 7:40 in the morning. 6 months, almost to the day, since Rayansh had first knocked twice on that door. The funeral was held 4 days later, in the small town outside Pune where Ariv had grown up. Rayansh stood at the back, unsure of his place among family, friends and relatives who mostly didn't know his name, let alone what he had meant to their son. It was Ariv's mother who took his hand in front of everyone and drew him forward, quietly introducing him as the man my son loved, and who loved him back, fully until the end. A sentence that undid something in Rayansh he hadn't realized he'd been holding together by force of will alone. He kept his composure through the service. It was only afterward, alone in his car in the gravel lot outside the small temple, that he finally allowed the grief to take him whole, great, racking sobs that felt like they came from somewhere far beneath the careful, controlled version of himself he'd built over years of medical training. He cried the way he imagined Ariv's mother must have cried, alone, in private, in the years since her husband's death, the particular grief of loving someone gone too soon, carried quietly so as not to burden anyone else with its full weight. Chapter 7: What Remains. Grief, Rayunsh learned in the weeks that followed, doesn't announce itself in the ways you expect. It isn't only the loud, shattering moments, though those come too, in the shower, in the car, in the quiet dark of 3 a.m. It's also the smaller things. Reaching for his phone to send a photo of a sunset Ariv would have loved, and remembering, every time, a fresh wound. It's walking past room 412, now occupied by someone else's story, someone else's fight. He took 2 weeks of leave after the funeral, the first time in 4 years he'd taken any real time off, and spent most of it sitting in his apartment, surrounded by the small collection of things Ariv's mother had insisted he keep. The battered copy of The Alchemist, a photograph of the two of them that a kind nurse had taken without either of them noticing, the chess set they'd played on so many quiet evenings. Ariv's mother called him every week, at first out of what felt like shared mourning, and later, slowly, gradually, out of something that had become its own kind of family. He'd want you to keep the promise? She reminded him gently, more than once, when she sensed him slipping into the old patterns of burying himself entirely in work, in duty, in the safety of not feeling anything new. It took a year before Rayunsh could walk through the hospital courtyard garden without his chest tightening. It took nearly 2 before he could hear certain old film songs without having to leave the room. But he kept the promise in his own halting, imperfect way. He took vacations again, reconnected with old friends he'd let drift during his years of overwork, let himself slowly, cautiously, begin to feel things that weren't only grief. He never stopped loving Ariv. He understood in time that he never would, and that this wasn't a failure or a wound that needed healing shut. Some loves aren't meant to close over like scar tissue. They're meant to be carried, gently, as part of the shape of a person, folded into who they become next. He returned to work eventually, steadier now in some ways, softer in others. His patients noticed a difference they couldn't quite name. A doctor who sat down more often than protocol required, who asked about families and small joys alongside symptoms, who understood, with a clarity few of his colleagues could match, that the people in his care were never just their diagnoses. Dr. Kapoor remarked once, quietly, that grief handled with enough care could deepen a person's compassion rather than closing it off, and Rayunsh, overhearing, thought of Ariv's last request, and felt he might actually be keeping it. He remained close with Ariv's mother for years afterward, visiting her small home outside Pune every few months, sitting with her on quiet evenings while she told him stories about Ariv as a small boy he'd never gotten the chance to hear firsthand. In many ways, she became the family he hadn't realized he was missing. A week after the funeral, she had handed him a plain, unlined notebook, its cover softened from months of handling. "He asked me to give this to you," she said, "when I thought you were ready." Rayunsh waited another month before he opened it. Alone in his apartment on a quiet Sunday evening. Inside, in Ariv's increasingly unsteady handwriting, were pages of small memories, gratitude, private jokes, and near the final entries, a single line he would return to for the rest of his life. "Whatever you build next, build it knowing I was glad, every single day, that it was you who knocked twice on that door." He kept a single photograph on his desk from then on. 2 young men, one in a white coat, leaning together over a chessboard, smiling at something just out of frame. A moment of borrowed time spent as fully as either of them knew how. Years later, an older Rayunsh, grayer now, gentler in the eyes, still the kind of doctor who sat down when he wasn't supposed to, brought a young resident to the hospital's memorial garden, to a bench Ariv's mother had dedicated quietly in her son's name. He told her the whole story, start to finish, watching her eyes fill with the particular tears of someone just beginning to understand what this work could cost, and what it could give. "Was it worth it?" she asked finally. "Loving someone you knew you'd lose so soon?" "Every single day of it," Rayunsh said. "I would do it again in an instant, even knowing exactly how it ends. Some loves aren't measured by how long they last. They're measured by how completely they're felt. And I have never felt anything as completely as I felt him." "Doesn't it scare you?" she pressed. "Getting close like that?" "Every day," he admitted. "But I'd rather have loved fully and lost, than played it safe and felt nothing at all. Some people get 80 years and never feel what I felt in 6 months with him. I wouldn't trade that, even now." The garden was quiet around them, the hedges trimmed as neatly as they had been on the very first morning, indifferent still to the passage of any one life, and yet somehow, in their stillness, holding all of it anyway. Every quiet morning, every stolen evening, every last light shared between two people who had chosen, against every reasonable caution, to love each other fully, unconditionally, for however long they were given. The resident wiped her eyes, something new settling in her expression. Not pity, but quiet resolve. Thank you for telling me. I think I needed to hear that it's allowed to hurt this much, and still be worth it. It's always allowed, Rayung said, rising, resting a hand briefly on the worn brass plaque before turning to walk with her back toward the hospital. Toward the patients still waiting, still living, still worth showing up for fully, one 7:15 morning at a time. Let it hurt, let it matter, and keep showing up anyway. The end.